What is going on, y'all? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com. We got another AMA for you today. This one's all about distinguishing the difference between true hunger versus cravings. But before we dive into this, let's roll the intro. All right, so this question is brought to us by Jani, and she asks, "Hi, Robert, I have a question for you about hunger signals. How do you differentiate between real hunger signals and cravings? In other words, between when the body really needs some food and when it just wants it. For me, especially during fasting, it's tough to distinguish between the two, and I feel worse afterwards if I didn't interpret the signals and acted upon them the right way. Thank you for your answer, and best regards." All right. This is kind of tricky because so much of our hunger signals and cravings are psychological more so than physiological in the sense of what the body needs. There are some people that are of the opinion that, hey, your body tells you whatever it needs and just totally give in to that and listen to it with utmost intensity. So in other words, if I feel the need for a bunch of donuts, that's my body telling me I need donuts. I don't recommend that train of thought. That's probably not going to bode well for your overall goals and health, especially long term. When it comes between hunger signals and cravings, oftentimes the best advice I've heard is just, what are you craving? Like if you're craving real, wholesome, single ingredient, natural foods, like if you're craving some meat or some vegetables or something like that, you're probably more so hungry. If you're just simply in the mood for something sweet, but you wouldn't really have that desire for something more satiating and fulfilling, then it's probably just a psychological craving for that sweet sensation. So kind of ask yourself this when posed with that sensation, that feeling. Also, try and be very self-aware as to what phase you're in and what it is you're trying to optimize for. If you're in a building phase and you're eating in a caloric surplus, you're likely not going to have a bunch of hunger signals because you are eating in a surplus. And yes, there's times where you will be hungry even if you are eating in a surplus, but by and large, you won't find yourself just ravenous at any point throughout the day because you're eating in a surplus and your body's getting what it needs, and there should be an ample reserve of everything that you have in your consumption to kind of ward off those really enhanced and increased cravings. So if you're in a caloric surplus and you're hungry, then you probably aren't in enough of a surplus. There's some nuance there, like don't just act on that at will. But if you're tracking your intake, if you know you're eating enough protein, if you know you're eating enough fat, if you know you're eating enough total calories, and your goal is to build muscle and you're eating in a surplus and you find yourself hungry, then you could probably get away with eating a little bit more because you are truly, in fact, hungry. Now, if you're in a deficit and you're in a cut and you're trying to lose body fat, you're going to experience some hunger. That is just part of it. It comes with the territory. People that say, hey, look, you should never be hungry on a diet, no matter what diet you're following. If you're hungry, you're not doing something right. Then you're probably not doing it right. You're probably not in a true deficit. I mean, hunger is not a bad thing. Hunger is a sensation. It's not necessarily a bad thing at all. It's basically a physiological response to what you are doing physically with your nutrition, with your training, with your caloric intake, your maintenance intake, your deficit. There's a lot of factors at play here. Your hormones are going to be implicated. But if you are in a true deficit, at some point or another, you're going to feel the sensation of hunger. Now, you should not be starving. You should not be malnourished. You should not be so depleted and deprived that your body is suffering. But hunger in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. So don't feel like you always have to give in to that hunger sensation. Because when you are in a prep, when you are in a cut, when you're in a deficit trying to lose body fat, hunger just comes along for the ride and it comes with the territory. So embrace that when it comes. Now, when you're doing extended fasting, you mentioned fasting. I don't know if you're doing like an intermittent fasting or an extended fast, but fasting is an interesting thing. We could do a whole other video on fasting in itself. I'm not really a fan of extended fasting for body compositional purposes, for weight loss, because I don't feel like that's the most optimal way to go about it. I do intermittent fasting just kind of by default, 'cause that's the way my day pans out. But I don't really do that many extended fasts, especially in the context of a caloric deficit and trying to lose body fat because there's just too many stressors on the body. So I don't really ever recommend extended fasting if you're also in a deficit and you're trying to lose weight. So when it comes to these sensations while in a fast, there's the feasting aspect to fasting. So people that do extended fasting, but then they never really have a legitimate meal, they're just kind of like picking at food after the fast is over, they likely are not getting enough food. Like, that's not a good thing, and that's going to increase your craving. It's going to increase your hunger signals. So that's going to do more harm than good. So if you're doing an extended fast and you're not having that yin-yang relationship and feasting after that fasting period, then that's not going to bode well for making it sustainable. And then you're going to kind of have these crazy, binging and purging cycles, and that's just not good. It's kind of a yo-yo diet that you want to steer clear from. So there's pros and cons to fasting, but keep that in mind. If you are in a deficit and you're in a cut, you've been in a cut for quite some time, and you're going to have increased hunger signals, especially if you've been dieting for months on end and you've been in this deficit phase. The important thing after that is to not give in to these cravings of just going off the walls and eating things that are hyper palatable that you can't really control can't really moderate intuitively. So keep that in mind. That's why when a show is over, for me and for my clients, I always recommend they have a celebratory meal, but it come from good quality foods that are basically the same foods they've been eating up to that point, but just in a higher quantity. So like when the show is over, a lot of competitors will eat like everything that they've avoided for months leading up to that show, like all the sweets, all the cookies, all the things that are not healthy by any definition of the word. And then it becomes incredibly harder to intuitively moderate that because they have this all or nothing mentality. Whereas if you go to a Brazilian steakhouse after a show and you just simply eat higher quantities of good quality foods like meats and good proteins and fats, some vegetables and some meat, you're going to be more likely to intuitively moderate that and be more in touch with your body's internal hunger signals and know when to draw the line and call it quits on just overconsumption. So I'm kind of rambling at this point because there's so much nuance to this question, depending on if you're in a building phase, a cutting phase, a competitor, or just somebody trying to eat intuitively. If you are trying to eat intuitively and you're just trying to more or less maintain a healthy composition, then the main thing I would say is focus on what it is you're hungry for. Like if you are just hungry for food in general, and you would you would find that satiating to consume a bunch of ground beef and eggs, then you're probably hungry. If you find yourself only willing and eager to consume a bunch of sweet, hyperpalatable foods, then it's probably more of a craving that you're experiencing than it is so much your body's true internal hunger cues. So have that self-awareness to know where you stand on that. So hopefully this added some value to you. Kind of a roundabout ramble answer there, but I enjoyed answering it nonetheless. So for anybody that does not know how these AMAs work, if you submit a question via the link in the description below, I use your question on one of these AMA videos, I will send you some bricks of your choosing. Jani, you requested some cookies and cream keto bricks, so I'm going to be sending those out to you. Thanks again for the question, Jani. Thank y'all for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time.